The police found 16-year-old Jennifer sitting quietly in front of her house, her clothes stained with blood. They received a distress call on the emergency line, and what they discovered was more horrifying than any human mind could imagine. Inside the house lay a nightmare, a dismembered body reduced to unrecognizable pieces. Was it a human or an animal? Who was Jennifer, and whose remains were these? Who was the killer? Welcome to a new and mysterious story on your channel. 4 years before this incident, on February 2nd, Dee Dee Rosen, Jennifer's neighbor, moved out of her apartment. There were no signs of violence or forced entry. Curiously, Dee Dee had previously lived in the adjacent apartment to Jennifer's. Rebecca Rhodes, Jennifer's mother, had gone through a difficult divorce 7 years earlier and had moved with her daughter to Somerset Tower, a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer described her father as absent from their lives. Her mother felt intense loneliness during that time. After the divorce, she met a doorman named Eddie, who worked in the same residential complex. Soon, they moved in together, forming a small, happy family. Eddie was always smiling, full of laughter. Rebecca appreciated his company. However, things changed. Eddie's strange behavior intensified, especially towards Jennifer. He became controlling and unpredictable. On the 6th of October in 1994, the police found 16-year-old Jennifer sitting quietly in front of her house, bloodstained. They received a call on the emergency number, and what they discovered was more horrifying than any human mind could imagine. Inside the house, they found a gruesome scene. A body cut into pieces to the point where it was unrecognizable. The question remained, was this the body of a human or an animal? Who was Jennifer, and to whom did this body belong? Who was the killer? Welcome to a new mysterious story on your channel. 4 years before this incident, on February 2nd, Diane Rosen, Jennifer's neighbor, checked her apartment. There were no signs of violence or a broken door. Interestingly, Diane lived in the adjacent apartment to Jennifer's. Jennifer's mother, Rebecca Rhodes, had gone through a difficult divorce 7 years prior and moved with her daughter to an apartment in Somerset Tower, a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer described her father as someone who wasn't consistently present in their lives. Her mother felt extreme loneliness during that time. After the divorce, she met a doorman named Eddie, who worked in the same residential complex. It didn't take long for Eddie to move in with them, and they formed a small, happy family. Eddie was always smiling, loved to laugh, and Rebecca was happy with his company. However, things took a dark turn over time. Eddie's behavior became increasingly strange, especially towards Jennifer. Despite being only 7 years old at the time, Jennifer knew she had to do something to stop him. 3 years into this ordeal, Jennifer lived through this nightmare in Somerset Tower. The police knocked on Rebecca's door, informing her that her neighbor, Diane, had disappeared from the adjacent apartment 4 days ago. The investigators questioned everyone in the building, including Eddie, who personally knew Diane. When asked how long Diane had been living in the building, Eddie replied, "About a year. I used to run into her in the building's lobby." Diane was a beloved and kind figure, especially to Jennifer. She was a specialist in treating autism and had moved from Canada to the United States less than a year ago to join the Colors Institute in Philadelphia, a clinic specializing in children with special needs. Despite the challenges of living in the United States compared to Canada, Diane chose an upper-floor apartment in a secure building. Jennifer's family was among the many residents who left the building after Diane's mysterious disappearance, fearing for their safety. The investigators were puzzled by the state of Diane's apartment. It was organized, with no signs of violence, blood, or empty bullet casings. Even the bed was neatly made. There was no valuable physical evidence except for a folded dollar bill from an ATM machine that Diane had placed in her notebook. An elderly lady living in the building claimed she heard a loud noise from Diane's apartment ceiling around 4 a.m. Diane lived directly above her, and there were no other suspects or new leads for the police. The case became a baffling mystery discussed in newspapers and TV shows. Jennifer, who knew Diane personally, was deeply affected. Despite their move to a private house in Cherry Hill, the loss of Diane haunted Jennifer's older brother, Blaine. He never gave up hope of finding her or discovering her fate. His determination led him to travel from Canada to the United States, searching restaurants, bars, and streets, carrying Diane's photo, hoping someone would recognize her. Despite the police's efforts, Jennifer's brother never stopped searching. Diane's case remained unsolved, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. Years passed, and Blaine lost everything, even his wife, who couldn't bear his neglect and constant travel. When he returned from America one day, she asked him to leave, and he moved out alone. As the family left the residential complex, they realized why people called Eddie the madman. His behavior was completely uncontrollable. He acted like a child, doing whatever pleased him without restraint. He would curse violently without reason, and his aggression towards Rebecca escalated. Jennifer knew this, even if she hadn't witnessed him physically hurting her. She understood the signs of abuse from her mother's demeanor when she tried to stand up to Eddie. But Jennifer's heartache went beyond witnessing her mother's suffering. She knew she had to do something to stop Eddie. Jennifer endured the violence of my hands for 7 years, and now the circle has turned on the mother. Teenager Jennifer realized that this situation cannot continue forever. After a discussion for hours with her mother, I convinced her to leave him, and the mother was convinced. Rebecca asked her daughter to prepare her bag, because she will come to pick her up at 6 o'clock in the evening from school. It was the last day of school this year to go live with her grandmother. Jennifer was very happy. I told her she would never see Eddie again, but Rebecca made a mistake. It cost her a lot, as Eddie told the madman what she intended to do as the mother promised. Jennifer saw her car approaching at the end of the day, but she was surprised that Eddie was driving the car, and her mother was next to him. Jennifer shouted angrily at her mother's face, objecting. But Eddie said they were going home for one last dinner together as a family. I felt in the car that something terrible was going to happen. The silence was applied, and the looks of my hand bothered her. They entered the house, and Eddie went to buy food. He took the mother's car and her keys. Jennifer tried to convince her mother to run away and leave the house, but the mother refused, so Jennifer went up to her room in the upper dish and fell asleep, to wake up at 2 in the morning to the sound of strong punches directed by my hand to her mother's face. She went down in panic to find her mother lying on the couch with her arm and jaw broken. His eyes were full of anger. I reached him, not to hurt her mother more than that, and to let them leave. He pulled the girl out of her hair and sat her on a chair and asked her not to look behind him, preparing an axe and throwing a big sheet on her. I heard Jennifer in her ears the blows that my hand directed to her mother's body, and the blood flew on her while she was under the bar. The blood froze in her veins out of sadness and fear. The voice suddenly became silent, and he lifted the cover from her. He grabbed her hands and took her upstairs. For 5 hours he tortured and assaulted the girl, stained with the blood of her dead mother. It was the worst hours in Jennifer's life. Suddenly he stopped and asked her a strange request. He gave her a knife and asked her to kill him, saying he didn't want to be in prison for the rest of his life. The terrified girl gathered and encouraged her and remained for a long time. Convince him to turn himself into the authorities, and that if he confesses voluntarily, the sentence may be reduced for him a lot. She was as a professional negotiator from the FBI. Eddie was finally convinced and called the police, who came to find Jennifer at the door of the house. Later, Eddie confessed to killing Dee Dee Rosen and stealing the dollars she withdrew from the ATM. He told investigators that he swung from Beck's balcony to Dee Dee's apartment. He said he strangled her during the robbery of her apartment, hid her body in a closet, and threw it a few days later along the highway. Eddie was sentenced to life in prison twice in the case of Rebecca's murder, as well as Dee Dee's murder. So what do you think, dear viewer? Did Rebecca oppress herself and her daughter by continuing her relationship with Eddie despite his suspicious actions and her daughter's father's complaint about him? Or is it fateful and she couldn't get over it? Share your opinions with us in the comments below. Don't forget to support us with a like button and subscribe to the channel to receive everything new. May you always be safe. Now let us go to our second story. On the 5th of April in the year 1992, the Morrissey family witnessed the worst crime ever to occur in Florida. 5-year-old Patrick woke up to the screams of his parents, witnessing an armed robbery. He became the sole person who could save his mother from this terrifying nightmare. To learn the details of this incident, stay with us in this channel until the end. At 10 p.m., Joe Morrissey dozed off in front of the TV, while his wife, Kay, continued working in her craft room. Their 5-year-old son, Patrick, slept in the master bedroom. About 2 hours after midnight, their daughter, Christina, who lived just minutes away, woke up to the sound of her cell phone ringing. The caller was her mother, barely audible over the sirens, urgently asking her to come over. Christina rushed to her mother's house, but the road was blocked. She got out of the car and hurried to the house, finding many officers there. Her father, Joe, stood in the middle of the road, wearing blood-soaked clothes. Kay, covered in blood, lay on the couch, her arm and jaw broken. Smoke billowed from the house, and Christina was informed that Patrick was with the neighbors. But she couldn't imagine what the little boy had experienced. Patrick couldn't comprehend what happened to his father. He didn't know he'd never see him again. Patrick believed his father was on a long trip and would return at any time. As time passed, Patrick noticed his father's absence and began showing signs of post-traumatic stress. But no one knew exactly what this child had witnessed. During questioning, Kay mentioned that some people had broken into their home and killed her husband. She mentioned something about the man who rented their house, Randy Tandidor, claiming he slipped on the stairs due to lack of repairs. Randy, a middle-aged father, wore an oxygen mask and limped, making the detective doubt his ability to commit a home invasion. It was clear that Randy wasn't the perpetrator. Meanwhile, during Kay's interrogation, she revealed that another person had communicated with the criminal using a wireless device. The police had one suspect, but without a clear motive for the crime. As time went on, the chances of solving Joe Morrissey's murder without further evidence dwindled. The detective received an unexpected phone call from Randy Tandidor's second son, Sean. Sean provided astonishing information. He told the police that his brother wasn't the killer. Their real father was. Sean explained that while listening to the news with his brother, they heard about the murder. Sean's brother walked away, and Sean followed him, asking if he had any involvement. His brother denied it, so Sean suggested he ask their father. Sean confronted their father, who ordered him to remain silent or be killed. Meanwhile, the older son was being interrogated in the adjacent room. He tried to protect his father, but would their father do the same when the older son was arrested? Sean approached his father, asking him to confess. His father replied that they hadn't arrested him, so he wouldn't take responsibility. Sean decided to testify against his father to protect his older brother and make their father pay for his actions. However, the police lacked strong evidence against Randy Tandidor. Sean requested to prove it himself and asked the detective for a recording device. The detective agreed, and Sean hid the recorder in the car key. Sean then interrogated his father, feigning concern for his safety and his brothers. The next morning, Sean returned the device to the police station, convinced he had enough evidence to incriminate his father. But Sean didn't know whether the device had recorded the conversation between him and his father. When the police tried to retrieve the audio files from the device, the recording couldn't pick up anything except noise. However, after many attempts, the police managed to uncover the mastermind behind the crime. On the 5th of April in 1992, Randy Tandy Dorr went to his older son, a desperate young man trying to make his father proud. The father manipulated his son's mind, convincing him to break into the Morrissey family home for money. When the investigators listened to the conversation between the father and son, they learned about the possibility of incriminating evidence at Randy's store. They searched the store and found multiple computers belonging to the Morrissey family. They also discovered discarded ties in the trash, which were used to bind both Joe and his wife, Kay. An empty hunting knife box and wireless devices matching Kay's description were also found. Additionally, foreign currencies, the same ones reported stolen from the Morrissey home, were recovered. In the garage, they found burn marks on the floor, evidence that had been intentionally destroyed on the same day. When Randy Tandy Dorr opened his front door, he faced the police officers, but this time, they had an arrest warrant. Kay was informed that both Randy and his son were in custody, awaiting trial. In April 1993, the trial began, presenting the judge and jury with the facts and evidence related to Joe's murder and the attempted murder of his wife and son. Despite Patrick's young age, he couldn't testify in court. However, excerpts from his interrogation on the night of Joe's murder were presented to the jury. Around 10:30 p.m., Patrick woke up to his parents' screams. He heard them pleading with a stranger. Terrified, Patrick lay quietly under the covers, listening attentively to what was happening in the other room. He then heard the front door close and silence enveloped the house. Patrick remained still and frozen with fear, alone in his parents' room. He had no idea what was happening outside. Later, he heard footsteps below his window but dared not look. Soon after, he heard his parents' voices. As they rushed toward him, he saw the man threatening them, holding a gun. The man ordered them to kneel beside the bed. Patrick didn't understand the situation, but his father instructed him to pretend to be asleep. Those were Joe Morrissey's last words to his son before he was killed. When Joe was taken to the living room, Patrick continued pretending to sleep as instructed. He heard his parents pleading for their lives. Then, suddenly, everything fell silent. Patrick remained lying there, feigning sleep, even as his mother cried beside him. But he didn't move. All he did was listen, hoping to hear his father's voice again. Eventually, his mother woke him up. She was still bound at the ankles and wrists. Patrick was the only one who could save her. Would Patrick's account change the course of the trial? Would it be enough evidence to convict the killer in the courtroom? Patrick's narrative left the Morrissey family speechless. When Randy Tandy Dorr's second son testified, he confessed to committing the crime. He also revealed that it was all orchestrated by their father. Randy claimed that it was his son's plan and that he had no involvement. Sean, Randy's older son, sacrificed everything, his brother and father, to achieve justice. Sean's courage and sacrifice raised questions. Could anyone else make such a sacrifice? And what matters more, family or justice? Dear viewers, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates. Stay safe.